So thank you for joining today. My name's Chris Love. I'm an account manager here at the Information Lab. I'm a Tableau Zen Master and Ultrex Ace. I've also joined by Bethany Fox from our consulting team. She's going to help me with some of the demos. This session is about saving your business time and money with what I've termed data science. The aim of today's session, though, is really going to be about making sure you've got an introduction to doing that data science in Tableau and Ultrex and help you make a start, work out where the options are and what suits your business so that you can make that start with data science, knowing that you're able to do so in the best possible way. I want to make a start by talking about kind of business intelligence maturity and where data science and predictive work fits into that. You'll be well used as a business intelligence analyst or a data scientist to working with that bottom layer, what I've called reporting and analysis, monitoring functions, looking back at the past. So what happened? Why did it happen? That monitoring function that is the main part of our business intelligence. You'll likely be using something like Tableau to do that. We then blend into areas like forecasting and predictive. So looking at trends on our existing data and looking at the history of that data, then what's likely to happen in the future by projecting those trends forwards. So they're things that we're not going to talk about today, like perhaps trend lines in Tableau, just using those to look ahead and project those trends onto an existing chart. Or they might be using the forecasting within, say, Tableau, which is relatively rudimentary. It looks at seasonality and additive functions to plot ahead over time and plot that forwards. Or perhaps using Ultrex, which has the very similar functions for doing that time series forecasting. Really what we want to talk about, though, is that more high value, the predictive and prescriptive analysis that we can do that says what is going to happen in the future, when and why. What actions can I take today in order to help my business and make sure that I'm getting the best possible actions and best possible value from that data and those actions that we're utilizing. I want to talk about an example of that to try and bring it to life a little bit. This is from one of our customers, Close Brothers. They've talked about this, and you can find more details about this on the Ultrax website. But their marketing team wanted to predict defectors. So by defectors, what they meant was people who weren't going to pick up a new deal within a certain time frame. And to them, that was 24 months of their current deal maturity. So Close Brothers are a merchant bank. They offer finance to their customers, often business to business, and so those people taking that data, taking that finance, were the people they wanted to try and understand about that, whether they were going to kind of renege or not pick up that defect on that current deal. They had 12 years worth of data that they could look back on to try and predict which customers might do that. And it was across a number of different business units. So it numbered about 10,000 agreements in total. And they had a number of variables, such as whether a customer was paying early or not, the term that was over, the interest rate, what assets had they financed. So perhaps car finance or other different things like that. So they turned those into variables, and then they used Ultrex to build out a number of models for that. So they built out a decision tree model, a random forest model, and a couple of other models that would help them understand whether or not, so it's very binary, yes, no, whether or not, given those variables, would a customer likely pick up a new deal within those 24 months. And then they were able to concentrate on converting those different customers. They did that by using data, I think it was up to 2015, to predict that, and then use the more recent data to then validate their model. One of the problems they wondered whether they might have was, would the history predict the future? So by using that old term data, they were able then to test their models on the newer data and validate the fact that the historical data would continue to be useful. And once they'd done that, they looked at the results, having kind of built this model and then utilized it to try and convert the customers who might defect. And they tripled their conversion rate. They got a 20% average higher deal size. So that really helped their business in terms of providing them that time and money that we're talking about today. The maintenance of the model, they said that was relatively easy to do every 6 to 12 months. They just simply had to update that data. They had to add changes in the data of customer type, and it was relatively easy to do. So I think that's a really good example of the kind of things you're able to do. They were able to do that being relatively new Ultrex customers. They'd got that data within the business already. They were already using Ultrex for data preparation and things. And they were able to bring that in and start using it relatively easy, almost as a test case for predictive data. And that's something that I think when we're approaching these more data science ideas, we need to think about in terms of those considerations, which I'll come to in a moment. But first of all, I guess it's worth positioning where the different tools fit into this. So Close Brothers there were using the Ultrex predictive tools. So the top right of what I've positioned here. Those are extremely powerful machine learning based tools. They're based in Python and Ultrex, Python and R. So the underlying code is built on that. And I'll go in to show you that in much more detail. But there's other options, I think, that are much less complex, where you don't need to be necessarily a data scientist like they were to build these models. They go all the way back to, first of all, Tableau. So I've talked about the simple forecasting you can do, but I'll also show you later some simple visual predictive modeling functions that you can use in Tableau. And then Beth's going to show us the automated analytics in Ultrex that is a lot more powerful than what you can do out the box in Tableau, but doesn't quite need the full-on data science knowledge of how to build a model and how to adapt it and build that out that perhaps Close Brothers used in that first predictive model, working out exactly which variables were going to be predictive and exactly what the results meant. So the automated analytics allows you to get very close to the power of those older predictive tools. And this new intelligence suite really just isn't as complex and allows what I term the citizen data scientist to do that work. I guess the considerations that I mentioned that you need to go into before you start thinking about data scientists, about using each of these tools and about doing data science within your business, even if you've got existing tools such as Tableau and Ultrex to do this, are a number of things. So I guess first of all, you need to think about your current workloads. Is this work are you going to take on an existing project and promise your business that you are going to be able to build something very quickly that might deliver the results that they need? And that feeds into expectations as well. I think one thing that I perhaps recommend is trying to build in some data science time around your current workloads that doesn't necessarily mean that you're working on a live project with high expectations where you're almost promising to get something out at the end. So taking something that you can bake in some time in your existing workload, get some existing data and almost just do a practice to build that out and deliver kind of that way. You're exceeding people's expectations. You're offering something that maybe they kind of aren't expecting, and you're also able to then demonstrate to them that you've got that capability before you then go and do it in anger in a proper live project with all the time pressures that presents. And I think it's also really important to consider where your business is already on that BI maturity that I talked about, and your internal culture. Do you already have a culture where you've got other teams and other data science teams perhaps using more sophisticated tools in R, or is this the first time that your business is really stepping into this new area? What are the expectations around that, and how much stock are you placing on this ability to do that? How will management view that? What are the skill levels of your team? Do you have people who have dabbled in this kind of analytics, who are willing to perhaps pick up new training, go on Udemy courses to understand new predictive functions, understand what they're doing, and build out a lot of that knowledge that you perhaps need with data science to understand what the models are, particularly when you're at the top right with the more complex Ultrex tools. Do you have people who are willing to do that and dive in and maybe learn that? Or do you need to find a function that is easier to learn, which maybe then fits into the more Tableau capabilities, where you're just building out extra capabilities within the visual piece without needing lots and lots of extra training? And then thinking about maintainability as well. What happens if people in the team leave? How much dependency are you building in on one or two individuals who maybe understand that top right corner much more? Understanding the answers to those questions and where you fit on those will help you determine where on that Tableau bottom left to Ultrex top right you fit. If the answer is we haven't got much time, we need to take things very carefully, we're relatively low skilled in terms of our predictive knowledge and our data science knowledge, then maybe start with the Tableau stuff and slowly build upwards towards the automated modeling. If you already have people who are building out these models, you need to make it quicker. You need to make it more accessible to other people. Then perhaps push towards the top right, particularly if you've got the time to demonstrate that to people. Obviously, every business is different, and so we're happy to, if you get in touch with us, we're happy to advise where we think might be a good place to start and explore that. But those are the considerations that you need to make when considering each of these technologies. So let's start diving into these. I won't take too long on each of these, but the Tableau predictive functions I'm going to start with. These are new modeling functions that were introduced in 2020.3, so one of the newer Tableau versions. And they allow you to build out a model that helps you understand where your data is fitting, almost around a line of best fit across that data. You've got two new functions. So you've got the model quantile function, which returns a predicted value based on a specified percentile, or you've got the opposite of that, which is the model percentile function, and that returns the probability of a value, an observed value you've got, being within the range of a predicted value based on those other predictors. That's quite hard to explain, and I tie myself in knots trying to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is just drag up an example so I can kind of demonstrate to you what that might look like. So you can see I've got female life expectancy here. So this is the average life expectancy of females across a whole host of different countries. And then we've got each country's health expenditure divided by their capita. So how much are they per capita? So how much are they spending on health per person within their organization. And then we've done a logarithm on that just to transform the data and make it a more linear relationship. What we'd like to understand is the relationship between each of these variables. So can we put some kind of predictability to say how much are these two things related? To do that, we use this function which is called percentile LEFHE per capita. So that is using the model percentile function. And all we're doing is comparing the average life expectancy for female versus that other predictive function. So we're going to use this to predict whether we're getting the appropriate value for that. And what this gives us is a value between 0 and 1, where 0.5 tells us almost that model is predicting accurately. So this is the gray values are the values that are around 0.5, and they're the ones that we're saying are within the range that we'd expect based on predicting the average life expectancy from the health expenditure per capita. Then we can go one step further and put those into bands. So we can start saying the 50th percentile are the dark green ones. The red ones are the outliers that are very far away, and we've got this range of predictors either side. And the way to use this then as a visual summary of your data is by taking a look. Let's say take a look at this 81st percentile. So we can see the Czech Republic. Their health expenditure gives an average life expectancy of 81 years per female. These countries are spending a lot less to get the same life expectancy. The United States is spending a lot more to get the same life expectancy. And the reason it's orange is that that's outside the 80th percentile of where we'd expect that predictability to be. So we can start using these functions to get some kind of visual representation of how likely is it that those data values that we're seeing, i.e. the 81st, are within the bounds of acceptability of our model of expressing health expenditure per capita to estimate life expectancy. We should, based on all the data, be getting data here. So we can kind of say, well, the United States is well outside that range, and why is that? Hopefully that made some kind of sense. And that's really where these new Tableau functions fit in. They are allowing you to visually look at the data and then add some kind of context to help your users understand, by some modeling, add some context to that data. So that it's a really good way of getting started within that data science world, if you like, without too much additional learning. Another example is by looking at kind of orders by sales prediction. We can do exactly the same thing. I won't go into lots of detail on that, but it works best when you're predicting individual values within your data. So it doesn't take any account of the fact that when you've summed data up or aggregated it within Tableau, you might have 100 records for one and one record for another. So what I recommend when you're doing this is that each of these dots correspond to a single order or a single country or a single person, so that they all mean the same thing. And you'll find lots more details about this on the Tableau website if you Google these functions. There's quite a lot of detail about that. On the other end of the scale, at the top right, then we have the Ultrex modeling tools that have been there for 2 or 3 years. And again, these have been there. We've done courses on these in the past. You can go to our Thursday training if you want to understand more about these when those lessons are on. And you could get in touch to find out more about these if you've already an Ultrex user and you want to know how to use these. They include all sorts of tools across decision trees, forest models, and these are the ones that Close Brothers used in the example that I talked about. We've also got clustering techniques as well as kind of simulation for that prescriptive modeling that I talked about. This is what that might look like. Underneath each of these are the Ultrex, the R code or Python code. You can see the little R here. So Dr. Dan at Ultrex and his team have put a lot of effort into making these tools really simple, so that you just simply need to select a couple of variables, select what you're building out, and then it uses all the R code underneath. You don't necessarily need to understand R to build out these functions. And you're then able to select the value that you want to predict, the things that you want to predict it with, and this will give you a model and a result after that. You do, though, need to understand something about the modeling process. So while I'm comfortable building out these models and selecting what I want to predict and how I want to predict it, what I don't know is how good is the model that I'm building at the end of this? How much do I need to tweak it? How much am I kind of predicting the obvious? And there's a lot of overlap in the predictor functions that I'm building. I don't know enough about modeling to make those kind of decisions. And so to use these tools, you do need a little bit of knowledge about that data science, that the functions that you're using and the models that you're using in order to tweak them to get the best possible answer if you're going to use it for quite, for proper business functions. And that's where the new tools, so the Intelligence Suite that was released late last year by Ultrex, come in. So this is the suite that sits between the more complex tools at the top right that I showed earlier and the Tableau tools. This is where I think if you are currently an analyst who's working in Ultrex and Tableau, or you're just starting to want to get started with data science within your business and don't really know where to start, then these new Ultrex tools will enable you to get started. They'll hold your hand through the process, as Beth will show, and give you results that you can be confident that you can use within your business live today and start making definite business decisions using them. They do that because they're automated. There's a lot of AI behind it, and Ultrex have put a lot of effort into making that really understandable. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Beth. Beth, if you want to share your screen and dive in and show us how that might work as someone building out the assisted modeling functions.
Will do. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so hopefully you can now all see my screen. So you'll see just a pretty blank canvas on Alteryx, which just has one tool on. It's just got this input data tool. And I'm just going to quickly explain what this is and what we're going to do with it. So the input data tool is obviously bringing in this data that I've got about breast cancer. So each row here represents one diagnosis of a tumor, so whether it's malignant or benign. So you'll see that we've got this diagnosis column here. And it's either going to have M or B. So malignant is a bad diagnosis, and then benign is kind of what you're after. And what we're wanting to do is use all of the other data that we have here. You'll see that we've got all of these different measurements about what's been tested. And we want to use that data to try and predict whether we're going to get a malignant diagnosis or a benign diagnosis. Okay, so as Chris has said, what we're going to do for this is use the assisted modeling. And this is going to allow Alteryx to kind of help us through this predictive process. So we've got all of these different tools up here, and I'm just going to drag on the assisted modeling tool. Now, every time you drag on one of those tools, the first thing you need to do is just push the data into it. So I'm just going to run my workflow, and then we can start our assisted modeling. Now, you'll notice on the left-hand side, there are actually two options here. So there's either the assisted one or the expert one. We're going to walk through the assisted one, but if you do know a little bit more about what you're after and you might want a bit more control over your model, then you might want to pick the expert one, in which case you would drag down each of these tools separately and do your own thing with it. But with the assisted one, which is what we're going to do, it will actually build out that model for you in the background. So you don't have to worry too much about all of the parameter tweaking as you go through. So the first time you do this, it's just going to show you the different steps that it's going to walk through. So you can turn off this tutorial once you've done it for the first time. But just to give you a quick overview as to what we're going to do, the first step is to choose exactly what we're going to predict. So in our case, that's going to be the diagnosis column. And then we're going to try and choose what type of method we'll be using for that. So because in this case, it's either benign or malignant, we're going to be using a classification method. But if you're trying to predict a number or a continuous variable, you'll want to use a regression method. The next step is to choose how automated you want the model to be made. So you can either do it as we're going to do, step by step, and you can pick your specific data types, choose what to do with missing values and that sort of thing. Or if you wanted to, you could just let Ultrex do all of the work for you, and it'll just give you the best model at the end. But if we're going to do it step by step, the next thing we'll do is pick our specific data types. And then using those, we'll try and figure out if there's any fields we shouldn't be using or what we can actually do with missing values. So obviously, if you've got a lot of missing values within your data, you're not going to be able to get that much value from them in your model. So you can choose whether to impute those using a median or a mode or a mean, or you can just remove them completely. The next step is to choose which features to keep or which columns to keep to build our model and which to remove. So again, as I've said, if you've got loads of missing values, you might want to remove those. Or if you've got any features which are too highly associated or too weakly associated with your target variable, you might want to remove those as well. And then finally, the last step is to pick which models to take forwards from there. So those are the steps that we're going to go through. So I can click Start Building now, and then we're into step one. So the first thing we need to do is pick which variable we're wanting to predict. So what is our target variable? Now we know that it's diagnosis. So when I click on diagnosis, it's just going to give me two options here for our machine learning method. So it's either going to give me classification or regression. But you'll notice that the regression here is grayed out, and that's because the type of data that diagnosis is, it's either going to be one thing or the other. So you can't do a regression analysis on it. But if I have a look at any of these numerical values, you'll see that the only method for those is regression. But I'm going to leave it as classification for diagnosis, and then I'll click next. Now, once you've selected your target, you can't click back and re-select. So just make sure that you've selected the right one, and then you can click continue. Now, this is where you can choose whether you want Ultrex to do all of the work for you and just give you the best model possible that it thinks is best for you, or you can do it step by step. And when you're doing it step by step, you can add in a little bit more of your business knowledge and have a bit more control over the model. So I'm going to do it step by step and walk it through with you guys. So the first thing we're going to do is just double check that we've got all the correct data types for all of these different variables that we have in our data. Now you'll see up here on the top right that Ultrex is asking us to just verify the data type of that field. Now on the right hand side, it's saying that it can either be a numeric field or an ID field. It's not too sure, so it's just wanting us to actually specify. It thinks it's numeric given the type of values that we've got, but we actually know it is an ID field. So I can go on that drop down and switch my data type to be ID, in which case, obviously the ID of these different measurements isn't going to give us any information about the diagnosis. So it's just going to drop that feature. And you'll notice all of the rest of them are just coming up as numeric. But if that is incorrect, you can go and change those ones as well. Okay, so I'm just going to click next. And the next thing we're going to be looking at is what to do with missing values. So Ultrex has just gone through all of the data and it's found how many or which columns have missing values in them and how many of those rows don't have anything in. So we can see this top one here, symmetry, it's got 13% of the rows are null. So 13% of that data doesn't have a value. So because there's still quite a lot of data there that we could use, we might not want to drop that feature because it might be important. But in order to use it maybe more successfully, we might want to impute those values. So what we can do is pick one of these different options here and choose how we want to replace those nulls and like what we want to replace it with. So whether we want to replace it with the mean value of all of the symmetry scores that we've got, or the median, or the mode. It's recommending the median in this case because that won't be as risk of being skewed if we've got, quite high values or quite low values. So the median in this case, we're just going to leave it as that. And then field 33, that's clearly just an error in the Excel file. It's 100% null. So I can see if I click on that all of the values in that column are null. So probably just something that someone's accidentally added in and then just deleted the values, but not deleted the column. So it's just going to drop that feature. Now, at any point through all of these steps, if you're not quite sure what to do or what each step means, then Ultrex has added in this handy glossary on the right-hand side. So as Chris was saying, this is really useful if you don't have that kind of data science knowledge to the really high level, and you're just starting out and you want a little bit of help as you go through, then you can have a look at the glossary and it will give you a bit of an indication as to what these different things will do and when you might want to use the mean to impute as opposed to the median and so on. Okay, so I'll jump on to the next step. And the next thing is to pick which features we want to build our model on. Now, you want to just specifically select certain features because if you take them all through, you might be at risk of overfitting your model. It might take a little bit longer to run, all sorts of things that, or loads of reasons as to why you might want to reduce the number of features that you're building your model on. So the way that Ultrex is going to help us choose those is by figuring out which of these features are highly associated or weakly associated with our target variable, so with that diagnosis variable. So we can see we've got these top two here that are highly associated with the target. Now that's a bad thing because it means that the model might be weighted too highly on those values. So it might skew our model and it might put too much emphasis on those values. So we don't really want that. So I can remove those. And then we actually have 3 variables that are on the reverse of that. So they're really weakly associated with our target variable. So there's not much point in having those in the model because it's not actually going to give us that much information. So I can go ahead and remove those 3. Now, the way that Ultrex is actually choosing or calculating whether these are highly associated or weakly associated is by these 2 different values here. So we've either got the Gini impurity value or the GKT value. Now, again, if you're not too sort of aware or like not too comfortable with any of these kind of data science terms, and that's absolutely fine because, as I've said, Ultrex has included this glossary. So we've got the Gini impurity measure, which is basically just going to let us know how well assigned or how well associated these values are to the target variable. So how much information does that variable contribute to the model? And then we've got the GKT value, so the Goodman-Crystal Tau value here. And that's going to let us know exactly how well that feature predicts the target. So how much variation in the dependent variable is explained by these different features here. So every single step that you take, Ultrex is going to help you make the best decisions as you go on. Now, this is where you might want to use the kind of step-by-step process because you might know that you actually do want to use one of these 5, but Ultrex would have automatically removed them if you just did the fully automated version. For all the rest of these values here, they're all coming up as being good predictors. So I'm going to leave those in. Then I'll click next. And then we're on to the final step now. So what it's going to do is just show me the different models that I have as an option for this type of classification. So I've got either decision tree, logistic regression, random forest model, or an XGBoost. On each of these, we have some information on them. So we can see what the pros and cons are of each of these different models, and also some use cases. So if you come to this knowing that you're wanting to do some churn analysis, you could go through each of these and say, okay, well, which of these has a use case for churn analysis? And you could pick that one. You don't have to pick just one at this point. If you want to, you can do them all and pick which one has the best accuracy and gives you the most correct outcomes. So that's what we're going to do in this case. I'm actually just going to leave them all selected. And then I can run these selected algorithms. So what Ultrex is doing in the background now is training these different models based on the data that we've given it. So it's not going to be taking any of the features that we removed. It's not going to be sort of taking any of the missing values because we removed those as well. And based on all of that, we can now see we've got each of these different models. And on the left-hand side, we've got a leaderboard. So it's saying that for this data, it believes that the logistic regression model is the best one. Basing that leaderboard on the accuracy. So we can see that out of all of the different predictions that were made for this model, 96.5% of them were accurate. It came out as the actual correct diagnosis. There are some other accuracy measures as well here. So you've got your area under curve. Ideally, you want the biggest area under curve. But we can also go and dig in a little bit deeper. So if I have a look at this overview, we can see this confusion matrix down here. Now, this is an interesting one specifically for this use case, because ideally you want to have the lowest percentage of false negatives. You don't want to give somebody or predict that somebody will have a benign tumor when it's actually malignant. So we might want to try and reduce that, or find the model which is giving you the smallest false positive or false negative result. So for the logistic regression model, we've got 7% false positive or false negative even. But if we go down, I can see random forest also has 7%, but the XGBoost actually has a 6% value there. So if we are trying to reduce the number of diagnoses that we predict as negative when they're actually positive, you might want to use the XGBoost value model. We also have a little bit more information on which features have been used and what their importance was for each of these different models. So we can see if I have a look at the decision tree, what the decision tree does is actually it will always use a lot of a lot of features. So we can see we've got quite a lot going on here. But if you want a model which is maybe easier to explain to somebody, then we could have a look at the XGBoost model, and it's only really taking these top 4 here as the most important features, and the rest of them is just going to classify it as negligible. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually take forward both the logistic regression model and the XGBoost model. Okay, so I can add those and continue to my workflow, but all of this is actually built on Python. So if you are comfortable with Python and you might want to take this through into a Python notebook and fiddle with the parameters a little bit more, what you can also do is just click on the drop down here and export that model to Python. And that's going to add in a Python tool into your workflow. And you see it's nicely documented code there. So I'll add these in to my workflow. You can see the workflow kind of flashing around in the background. And once that's done, it's going to close down that assisted modeling window and then give me those different models and each of the tools that Ultrex has used in the background to create those models. So you'll see that each of these different tools are all of the ones that are in the assisted modeling folder that we have. And if you wanted to do the experts type of modeling, then this is essentially what you would be building out yourself without the hand holding from Ultrex. Now at this point, if you want to, you can go and adjust some of the parameters. So we've got this tool here. This is our classification tool. And if I open that, we can see that this is my logistic regression model. And I can go and tweak some of these parameters if you're wanting to try and fine tune it a little bit more. We also have this Python tool down here. And this is where you can take that out and start to tweak the parameters in your Python code. So once this loads, you'll see that it is a nicely documented workflow. So really, really easy to understand and pass on to other people. Okay, so the last thing to do, now we've trained our models, I actually want to test them. So I'm going to bring in another input tool. And I've got some more data here. I've got some, so that's my breast cancer train data, but I've actually got a test data set, which is we're going to use, it has got diagnosis on them as well. So we're going to use that to see how accurately it's going to predict them. So I can bring this in. Now what I want to do is just connect that data up to our new models. Like so. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and add a browse tool onto each of those and then just run that workflow. So what it's going to do now is taking this trained data that we've built the models on, it's running it through each of these different model steps that we had. So this is what we went through in that window that popped up. And then based on that, it's going to build out the models and push through that test data. Now we've got these different outputs. And I can scroll all the way to the right. And based on our logistical regression model, we can see exactly what the predicted diagnosis was for each of these different measurements that was taken. So we can see that this row here, if I have a look at that, that it was predicted to be a malignant tumor with 99%. So 99% likelihood that it was going to be malignant. And if I go and scroll to the left-hand side here, I can see what the actual diagnosis was and see that it actually was malignant. So in this case, it predicted it correctly. And we can also see the same sort of outcome for our XG boost model. Now, at this point, this is where you might want to take out these tests and go and figure out which one you want to keep, which one had the best accuracy with the test data, and take it from there. Okay, so that was a really high-level overview of the assisted modeling. As you can see, there's a lot of hand-holding. It's not too scary, and there's lots of help and explanation as you go through with Ultrex. So it really does help you out there. The next thing I'm going to show you some of the text mining capabilities that Ultrex has brought in. So for ages, it was quite difficult to parse a PDF tool in Ultrex, but now they've actually added in a PDF input. So this is part of the Intelligence Suite. So let me just drag on this PDF input tool. And the first thing you need to do is just tell Ultrex where your PDFs are saved. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to these PDFs. Okay. And just to quickly show you what these PDFs are, it's just some weekly statistics for how many people have been tested for COVID-19 and how many people tested positive and the change in number of tests from last week. So this is a PDF which is published every week on gov.uk. And I just want to download this PDF every week and just run that through my Ultrex workflow to update and get a complete list of the number of tests for each week and how many of them came out positive. So if I scroll down, I can see on my third page that I've got those different values there. So I've got the number of people that were tested, I've got the change in comparison to last week, and I've got the number of people that tested positive. So I've just gone and downloaded 2 of those PDFs, and I can see that those same values are in the exact same place as the other PDF. So this is just going to work if you've got the same kind of format for every PDF that you're wanting to parse. Okay, so I'll just jump back into Ultrex and I'll just run that. And when you do run it first time, it's not actually going to parse it as you might expect. So we can see here on the output that it's just going to tell you how big each page is of that PDF and the path for that PDF. So what we need to do is let Ultrex know where to look for the data. So I'm going to do that by dragging on this image template tool. And then I can go navigate and open to one of these PDFs, and it will open it as an image within Ultrex. So you see on the left-hand side now, I've got that PDF here. So I'm just going to go through to the third page because that's where my data is. And now all we need to do is just annotate each of these different pages so it can pick out these different numbers. So you'll just do that by drawing a box over these different numbers. So this 1.9 million is the number of tests. It's just going to pass that as a string. You can only pass it as a string or an image, so I'll leave it as a string. I'm going to take that 12%. This is the rate of change. Leave that as a string. And then I want to take through the number of positive tests. And save that. Now, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and pick out a few more of these different values. You can see that there are a few more on this page, but I'm just going to leave it as that for now. And now what Ultrex is going to do, I just need to connect up these two different tools, and it's going to have a look at these different areas that I've selected in that PDF for all of the PDFs that are in that file that I navigated to. So I can drag on the image to text tool and connect these up. I'm saying that the image is the PDF itself. I'm just going to pop a browse tool onto the end of this and run it. So it's going to be scouring through each of the different pages in those two PDFs that I had there. And it's going to look at that specific area that I annotated, and it's going to find those values. So now you can see that for those two different PDFs, it's got values on page 3 of both of them. And we've got those number of tests, the rate of change, and the number of positive tests for each of those different weeks. So from this point onwards, all you would have to do is just use some of your standard Ultrex tools to go ahead and get rid of the commas, change the data type to be a number, and so on and so forth, and then continue your analysis from there. Within the text mining tools, you can also do other things such as sentiment analysis. If you wanted to, you could do a word card. You could also obviously do that in Tableau. So there's a lot more that you can do with this. This is just kind of scratching the surface. But if you do have any questions, pop them in the Q&A and I'll help you, or I'll see if I can answer them on there. But I'm just going to hand back over to Chris, who's going to wrap up.
Thanks, Beth. That was fantastic. I'm just going to share my screen again. So what you've seen from Beth is a really good demonstration of two of the areas of the intelligence suite. You've got the automated modeling, the bit that really helps you with that data science piece. It helps those people, those citizen data scientists who aren't that confident with data science or predictive technology, and helps you really know that you're using best practice. Know that you've got the backing of that Ultrex technology behind you, so that you can be confident in the predictions you're making. You can control every step of that. So if you are starting to, as you become more used to that process and start to get more confidence, then you can start controlling every bit. As Beth said, you can bring in your business knowledge, and then you can really make that actionable really quickly to build out your models and start using them in anger. The second piece was some additional benefits. So being able to pass those PDFs. I was really surprised to see that Beth could kind of pull out those elements of the within the text to pull that. I think that was virtue of the text always remaining in the same places, which was good. But I've seen that used for invoices, things like pay slips, anything where you're getting something via PDF and you really need to strip those elements out and then create it back down to turn it into a data set, and you can be confident where those elements are. Then you can use that and then say take that data and then use it further on, perhaps as an input to an automated modeling piece or something like that. So I really like the fact that Ultrex have given us this automated modeling. It certainly, when I think back to my career and my confidence in being able to do data science, I've never been confident to use the Ultrex tools, the older Ultrex tools, the predictive tools, by myself, because I've never been sure that the answers I'm getting out of, I can use in anger, that they're going to be really, the best that I can do. And I think the automated modeling just gives me the confidence that I can do that. Intelligence Suite is a separate download, so it's an add-on to Ultrex. It's something that you need to get from Ultrex and download. So it's £1,840 per user per year. That gives you all the features that Beth mentioned within that. It allows you to do that automated modeling, so you get those Python tools, you get the OCR and text analytics as well for the PDF that she was talking about. So you can really start building that out. If you are, a question that's often asked, I don't think it's been asked today yet, but if you are interested in trying that and you're not quite ready to take the plunge with the Intelligence Suite, then you can ask us to get involved. We can provide you a trial and we can work with you to help you make that successful, so that you can justify that and test out those automated modeling. Also, you might be looking at that automated modeling and thinking, I just need a little bit more control. And that's where the more sophisticated tools might be more suitable for you within Ultrex themselves. So again, get in touch if you're not sure which of these two tools are suitable, then we can help you understand which ones are through the trial and give you training in both to help you make the most of those two options. We have had some questions. These slides will be available later. And there was also a question about, as Beth went through the recommendations that the Ultrex Suite automated modeling suite was making, there were some options to impute, and Jordi just asked, did it always recommend median or not? And generally, the recommendation, yes, it always chooses that median, because that's generally the recommendation that it would make. It doesn't use the data to make that recommendation. I think Ultrex will work on that and start adding some technology into that looks at the data and maybe looks at skew and other things to try and recommend the median or mean. But from my experience, then it does always recommend median at the moment. So I expect that's something. No promises from me. I don't work for Ultrex, but that's something that maybe we can push them for in future versions. If you've got any more questions, the Q&A box is open. I know we've had a couple, so feel free to dive in there and ask any questions. You can also get in touch with us at info@theinformationlab.co.uk. to ask us any questions, or my email address is chris.love@theinformationlab.co.uk. So feel free just to drop us an email. Often people are shy on these Q&As and don't like to ask too many questions, so we can always answer those via email as well. Beth, I had a, oh, we've got a quick question from how to proceed. Amanda, I'm not sure I understand your question. If you could kind of expand on that a little bit, then we can try and answer that. Beth, I don't know whether.
I'm not too sure either, I'm afraid.
I was going to ask Beth, I saw that you had about 400, 500 rows of data in your data set. If you've got more data, how does automated modeling kind of cope with the bigger volumes of data that we're likely to see when we use this in anger?
So it would be a little bit slower, but that is where you would do things like your feature selections, because obviously if you're taking through a whole load of rows, then that's going to be it's going to take a little bit longer in order to. Oh, there we go. We've got an answer from Hamad there, but yeah, if you've got a whole load of rows, then it's obviously going to take a little bit longer to compute and to build out that model. So you will just try and pick the better feature selections there. But the more data you've got, then the more likely that you're going to be able to use that to create a more accurate model. So if you've got a lot more data, then that's great. And as long as it's nice and clean and available for use, then yeah, it's a good step to do. So a technical background, that is a development background. Still not sure. I don't know, Chris, if you...
I wonder if your question, Hannah, is how do you kind of approach this if you are from a development background, you don't have the analytical skills. I think that's where if you're being asked to build out Ultrex workflows or modeling, and you don't necessarily have that predictive background, then the automated modeling is a really good way of being able to do that without necessarily having that data science analyst background. If you're a development person, then you can dive in there. Ultrex, I tend to say, is aimed at people who are in the business, who will have that business knowledge. And maybe what you'll find is that people within the business who have those kind of problems can use automated modeling without necessarily development teams needing to get involved, which I often see as is a definite advantage of Ultrex. And trying to see where that Ultrex use case fits and who should be using it is one of the things that we can help advise on as well. If that didn't answer your question, get in touch with us, info@theinformationlab.co.uk. We can try and answer that. But we are coming up, we're 2 minutes to the end of the webinar now. So I think what I'll do is I'll draw an end to there. If you do have any questions, please do drop us a note and feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks everybody for listening. Have a good day.